Today's discussion is a very important one that I think we all think we know a lot about, myself included, and also one where there have been some unfortunate grave distortions in the world at large about. We're talking about the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments are perhaps maybe the most important, or not, I won't say the most important, but the most ubiquitous, most well-known parts of the Torah. I would argue perhaps is the Ten Commandments. You talk to people on the street, there's billions of people around the world that have heard of the Ten Commandments, that even the atheists say we believe in the Ten Commandments.
We believe in the right to bear was the commandment, right?
Yes, that's something else.
Took it off of Oklahoma.
The what?
Ten Commandments. They just took
They took it off
from the
because
state building.
That was a state
Yeah.
province, too, that the state is the one that said they had to be moved.
yeah. So, but it obviously originates in the Torah. Interestingly, I don't know if people know this. It's actually written in the Torah twice. Once in Exodus, chapter 20, and once in Deuteronomy. It's repeated. Obviously, when an entire section of the Torah is repeated almost verbatim, it's important enough, obviously, to be said again. And the question is obviously why. Obviously the Torah is treating it with some importance.
Isn't one of the differences? It says remember the Sabbath. The other day, the other one it says observe. Or?
Yes. So that's one of the. There's a bunch of differences.
That's why you have two candles for Shabbat.
Yeah, Zachar and Shamor. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying this is there's so much scholarship on this part of the topic. Why are there differences or slight differences? So that's one substantial difference, which is a different word. Remember the Shabbos or observe the Shabbos.
One is honor thy father and the mother, and
well,
one is honor the mother and the father.
Well, no, no. It both says honor mother. You're getting mixed up with ish imo of tiro. It says when it says to fear your father and mother, it says mother first and then father. When it says to honor, it says dad first and then mom.
So
Why?
that's a different part, a different.
I said, well, that's a different mitzvah. That's not in the Ten Commandments. And the Talmud explains that as saying that a child is more likely to fear their father and love their mother, honor their mother. So therefore, it's flipped around in the Torah to tell you that you have to love them equally. You have to honor them equally. So therefore, it says dad before mom when it comes to honor, and it says mom before dad when it comes to fear. You don't really.
You had that backwards. You fear the father, you honor the mother.
No, I didn't have it backwards. Did I? Maybe I did. Either way, it says fear the mother before the father. Yeah, I didn't have it backwards.
Emotionally, the opposite.
Yeah, it means someone tends more likely to tend to fear their dad more than like a dad rarely tells a child, "You better wait till your mom gets home." That doesn't happen.
No, I do it all the time.
Some, yes, maybe there are some exceptions.
Like passing the buck.
But says the Talmud, because there's a tendency to fear dad more than mom, therefore to kind of balance it, it says fear mom before dad. But what I'll tell you is, there is a difference between the first and second rendition of the Ten Commandments in the reasonings for that mitzvah. So in the first time it says fear your father and your mother. Honor your father and your mother. In the fifth commandment, and then if you look all the way in Deuteronomy, when Moshe repeats it, it says, in order that you'll have a long life and you'll be happy and everything. And the question is obviously why. The Talmud actually asks that question. Why would it give a whole elaborate reason only in the second rendition of the Ten Commandments and not in the first? And the answer is because we know the first tablets were destroyed. So what it says in Exodus is what was on the first tablets. What it says in Deuteronomy is on the second tablets. And because the Almighty knew that the first tablets were going to be destroyed, therefore, He doesn't want to talk about long life and happiness and all the great things and then just smash it. So therefore, He kind of took that out of the first rendition of the Ten Commandments in order to not destroy the good tidings included in it. But in Ten Commandments that were not destroyed, therefore that it has the full treatment. Honor your parents, in order that you'll have long life and happiness, etc.
Did the rabbis ever say anything, and I know we might be getting a bit off topic here, about children being raised in single families? In terms of, we now have a tremendous number of
Yeah, well,
Speaking
when it talks about honoring parents, it asks the question, what if the parents are divorced? Or what if one parent is deceased? That it does address that. In fact, there's this really interesting, I would say perhaps on the surface, really bizarre Talmud, where this guy comes to the rabbi and says, well, who do I honor more? You know, if my parents are not together, who do I honor more? So, he persists in asking the question. And then, if the dad asks for a drink of water, mom asks for a drink of water, which one do I get the drink first? And he says, what you do is you fill up one drink of water and you drop it between them and you squawk like a chicken. And obviously, that's not a typical response from the rabbi. And maybe
Sounds like that's a cop-out.
sounds like he's making a joke. But
puts
it,
the child in an untenable position.
well, I'm saying just the response is bizarre. It's a legitimate question, I would think. No, it's like, what do I do? Both parents are thirsty, and they both want a drink from me, and I have a responsibility to honor them both. Well, which one do I do?
2 cups, one in each hand.
Well, that's actually what, you could get 2 cups.
Yeah, but obviously we're assuming it's not possible to do both at the same time. And he gives them a really, really bizarre answer. You put it between them and squawk like a chicken. It doesn't seem like a real. I think it's a
Yeah, it
legitimate
does
question.
sound like the rabbi's making either a joke or trying to pass the buck or whatever.
So that's possible because the Talmud goes on to say that this rabbi knew that this child was an orphan from both parents. So he was just asking and persisting and pestering for not a practical reason. That's probably the simple understanding. Is that the guy's like asking some silly questions and persisting. He's like, just drop between them, sparkling a chick, and just get out of here. But there are those that talk about the. There are other places in the Talmud that describes certain behavior of chickens, and it's possible, it's possible that what the rabbi was really telling him was something profound. Just to fill you guys in quickly, I'm saying there's Ezra. Right? Ezra made a bunch of enactments, a bunch of edicts. The Talmud lists 10 edicts that Ezra made. And one of them, since rescinded, was that after a man has a seminal emission, he has to go to the mikveh.
He has to do what?
Go to the mikveh.
Okay.
That's what he enacted, and the reason why the tagline is that Torah scholars should not be with their wives like chickens. Apparently, the mating frequency of chickens is something that the Talmud wants to avoid or Ezra wanted to avoid. Either way, that was since rescinded. So there are those that want to explain that what the rabbi was actually telling him was something more profound. Either way, so to answer your question, Janet, it is discussed what happens in one family households, and obviously, even if parents are divorced, God forbid, and worse if it's not amicable, and there's a lot of tension and friction and I guess fighting even, the child does not lose their responsibility to honor their parent. And in fact, there's almost nothing that can make a child, free a child of their responsibilities, of their intense responsibilities to honor their parent. So let's say your parent is really, really not a good guy, you still got to honor them. And there's almost no way to get out of it.
It doesn't. It's,
Mass murderers.
Yes, I would say maybe a mass murderer is different, or...
and I also say, and I mean, there are some parents who have made the argument when they want to dominate their adult kids' lives or tell their adult kids what to do, how to live their life, who to marry, they'll say, remember, it says honor thy father and thy mother.
Right.
However, it doesn't say, correct me if I'm going the wrong direction here, it doesn't say obey your mother and father when you're a parent yourself, you don't necessarily have to, I think.
Of course not.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that this would really warrant its own class, honoring parents, because we'll talk about it a little bit, because there's really a lot, and the laws are very exhaustive. Like, I'll give you guys an example here. If, let's say, your parent is involved, this is what the Talmud says, your parent's involved in an argument with someone else. So you cannot contradict your parent. Why? Because it's not. If you really, it's not reverence to go and say I'm an equal with my parent, and I'm going to say that I disagree with him. Talmud goes a step further. What about if my dad's having an argument with someone else? I'm not allowed to agree with my dad. Why? Because when I show that I agree, that means that my dad needs my approval. He needs my approbation. Who am I?
So you just
Right?
keep your mouth
Am
shut,
I an
right?
equal?
Is that what the message is? You just keep
Right,
your mouth.
and if your dad says, "What do you think?" Well, then he's essentially saying he wants to know what you think. Then honoring your parent is to actually tell him what you think.
But
that
if he
might-
doesn't ask, you just stay quiet, right? Is that the message?
Yes, you have to revere, to honor your father. You honor your father and mother, your parents. The Talmud goes on and says this is so bizarre. Like it's not some. We'll see. This will be a theme, perhaps, in the Ten Commandments. How perhaps difficult they are to fulfill, and how we think of them in a different light than what they truly are. Talmud says that the requirements of honoring your parents are so severe that it's better for a child to be born parentless. It would be ideal. And obviously, someone who's born without parents is at a severe disadvantage in life. Mm-hmm. We know that. But because the requirements are so rigorous and so intense and so easy for someone to make a mistake, that it's even better for a child to not have parents. To just be orphaned from an early age, be on his own, and be at the mercy of the world. But at least they won't encroach on the severe mitzvah of honoring parents. Either way, so the Ten Commandments are written twice in the Torah. We have to obviously ask the question why there's slight differences. Some of them are like one word that doesn't really change the meaning. Some of them are more substantive, like what Steve mentioned, and that like it says different words. But the simple answer is that this was that Exodus is the first set of tablets, and Deuteronomy is the second set of tablets. So it's not a contradiction; it's just different. It's different tablets, and therefore there's slight different variations in what it says. Okay, but I want to start from a basic level here. Ask them some important question. Oh, one more thing. I want to encourage everyone to actually read them. I don't know if we have read them. I feel we have, as a society, a rudimentary understanding of what they say. But I think it's important to read the actual chapters that talk about the experience, because, as we'll see perhaps a little bit later, the experience and everything else that was going on around the time of the Ten Commandments, that is perhaps even more important than the content of the Ten Commandments. So the 10 mitzvahs that we're getting at Mount Sinai, right, that's very important. Obviously, the 10 very important mitzvahs. But the experience and the prophecy and the revelation and what actually happened and what the Jewish people saw, what was going on there, is, I would say, even more important than the content of these 10 mitzvahs. So it's important to read the whole narrative, because in the movies and the books, in the fiction, they have done a disservice, or they haven't been necessarily true to the original work.
That is shocking.
Yes. Okay, so I want to start with a question. So we have this experience. We have Mount Sinai. We have the Exodus, and just 50 days later, we have Mount Sinai. And this is the Jewish people getting the Torah, and it's going to be this momentous event. And we have these 10 mitzvahs. And I want to ask a very basic question. Maybe it's a simple, maybe it's a silly question. But why do we need to precede the giving of the whole Torah, all 613, everything that the Torah wants from us? Why do we have to have certain mitzvahs that are different, or certain mitzvahs that are going to be at the beginning of this? It means, why are we separating the mitzvahs into 10 plus 603? Like, these 10 are different. They're on a pedestal. That's question number one. Question number two is, on a slightly different note, what about these mitzvahs that are special? Obviously, these
What
mitzvahs...
about the 10 that are
Yeah.
special? Okay.
Means, first of all, are some mitzvahs of the Almighty more important than other mitzvahs of the Almighty? You would say
Well,
no.
not necessarily. I would just say that the answer to your first question is that's what makes us Jews. That's what makes us. We're supposed to go above and beyond. So it's not just these 10, but we have extra responsibilities, extra
Oh, we have
obligations to-
613.
Right,
But
that's-
why are we separating them into different categories? If they're mitzvahs of the Almighty,
Because these are the basic fundamentals of what a just and compassionate society, these are the minimums, these are really the 10 minimums for which society sustains.
yes, I would agree to a certain point, and I would argue
You would
that.
argue?
No, I wouldn't argue with you, but I argue that
You're
that-
not his parent.
That
so you
I
can't
would
get-
say that the 7 Noahide mitzvahs, which are like the 7 universal mitzvahs, I would say that those are perhaps even more mitzvahs that are the basic fabric of a functioning society.
Aren't most of those?
Some of them are overlapped, of
Oh,
course.
yeah, I was about to say,
Yes.
aren't most of those in the 10?
Yes, so there is some overlap. But I would argue, and we'll talk about this a lot today, hopefully, thou shalt not covet. That's a hard mitzvah. Observing the Shabbos, that's not for everyone. It's not necessary to, to have a functioning society. Even honoring parents. Our society today in America, I would argue, has, done away with that to a big, large extent, unfortunately.
And I think even
And we
this-
still function fairly well, right?
Well, exactly, and
No, we don't function.
Okay, well, we could
That's
argue
part
about
of the
this, but
problem.
it's...
The fabric of our society is unraveling before us.
Yeah, to a certain extent. It depends how we're going to define this. But I think that to limit the Ten Commandments as being just a basic, universal, rudimentary mitzvahs for everyone to have a functioning society, I think that might be true to a certain extent. I think it goes far beyond that.
yeah, and it's interesting that Christians supposedly revere the 10 Commandments, even fundamentalist Christians, but they obviously don't observe them. I mean, Christians don't observe the Sabbath, right?
That's right.
Or
That's right.
maybe some do in some way, in their own way.
Of
But,
course, original.
Well, Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, they
clearly
observe
do.
the
That's one of the
Sabbath.
okay,
tenets.
but that's a relatively small.
Well, yeah, but the Christians, Sunday is their Sabbath, so I mean, it's just a different day. So
Okay.
they have their.
Some Christians
Okay.
are choosing Sunday.
You had all those blue laws and things. Remember?
I'm a native Texan. I know about the blue laws.
In
A man
Philadelphia.
isn't supposed to cut his hair. Isn't that
No.
what you know?
Couldn't sell alcohol.
That's not
I think
a
that's Nazarite.
You couldn't sell
That's
toys
another.
on Sunday. They
7
closed
Noahide
that part
laws
down.
are Avram and Achai, which means you cannot eat meat from a live animal. If the animal's still alive, it's got to be
Right.
dead before you eat it. Exactly. And you would think that would be necessary for functioning society. Kind of like people pull off the leg of a cow and start grilling it.
But people did
okay.
that at that
I'll take the second, Sandy. Not to blaspheme, not to steal, to have some sort of system of governance, some sort of law, no anarchy, and the 3, and idolatry, murder, and rape. Those are the 7. Very, very
The
basic.
Noahide laws, what happens if you, what was the structure if you did not obey?
Yeah, so these are adjudicated by the Gentiles as well. Means it's not the Jews don't adjudicate me. These are universal laws given to humanity by the Almighty.
What was the punishment for rape?
Well, it's not clear necessarily that this thing was actually adjudicated. It's the responsibility of humanity, so to speak. And when they have to have a system of laws, they would also mete out punishments that they feel are appropriate.
So was it up to the local? I'm sorry. Was it up
Well, the Jews never intervened in the behavior of the non-Jews. So
Why did you,
But God did.
yes, that would be true.
as far as the 10 Commandments, why did you make light of the Shabbos as being, not everybody can do that? Well, I mean.
Well, it's clearly not
Israel-
intended for everyone.
Well, but.
It's a Jewish mitzvah only, so we're 0.02% of the 0.2% of the population. It's not a mitzvah for everyone, clearly.
No, but if you're in Israel, they're pretty much, they're not too good.
Well, there's something special about Israel, right? Remember, that's a Jewish state,
Yeah,
so
of course there is.
right. Part of the actually baked into Israeli law is that Shabbos is a day where business and commerce must be ceased. So every restaurant that's open on Shabbos is actually violating Israeli law. Not Torah, the Torah law as well, but Israeli law, because the founders of the state recognized and had sensitivity to realize that that Israel's a Jewish state, thus has to reflect that in its laws.
So the weekend in Israel is Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday?
It's just Saturday. There's a movement now. There's been a movement for a couple of years now to add Sunday as well. Sunday's a regular work day in Israel, and
in everywhere else in the Middle East.
right. So they want to change that. There is an effort, and I think it'd be a fantastic idea to change
So
that.
they have a 6-day work week in Israel.
6-day work week, and the problem is, what's the problem? The problem is that there's only one day of the weekend, and that day happens to be the Shabbos. So if there's going to be a soccer game, for example, with 50,000 fans, when's it going to be? It's going to be on Saturday, and yes, it's an off day, but is that really what
And that-
the
is
Jews
that-
ought to
that's
do?
violating the Sabbath.
That's violating the Shabbos.
Well-
So I think everyone would be happy if you add another day. First of all, you synchronize yourself with the rest of the world, number one. Number two, you provide an opportunity for Shabbos to be kind of a spiritual off day. Let Sunday be the day that it is today in America,
Recreational.
and recreational, family, etc. And you could get the work done, in 5 days.
Children in Israel play sports like kids here do.
Yeah, of course.
And so, on what day, okay, fine, so on what day do the kids have their games?
Yeah, so what's obviously this depends on which community, which city, but unfortunately, because Saturday is the only off day, there's a tendency for a lot of what I would call Shabbos-like activities to happen on Saturday, and I think that would probably change substantially if there was an off day on Sunday. Sandy, you had a question earlier.
Well, actually a comment to
Comment.
your question about, we've got the 10, why have the 613? Or
Well, why are they different? Well, what's special about these?
Well, my thought was, and this could be totally off the wall, the 10 are the outline, and then all the rest of the commandments give the details on how to keep the 10.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about that precisely.
And aren't the first, 3 commandments between man and God, and the other ones?
Yeah,
man
so
and man?
so the first 5 actually between man and God, and the next 5 are man and man. And there's a lot of scholarship about this. We're not going to do so much about this, about how, like, if you look at them in 2 columns, how they relate and how they, all that very fancy footwork is done. I want to try to delve into the kind of the core ideas and the core structure. So we have 10 mitzvahs that are somewhat different than all of the 603, and how are they different?
Are we
And
going to
additionally-
get through all 10 today?
We'll get as far as we can.
Let's make a commitment, if we can, if nobody will disagree, to at least get
Yes.
before we end to the difference between killing and murder.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested
And
in
don't
that.
forget the coveting thing.
The what?
Yes.
Coveting thing.
Oh, the coveting thing. Yes. All right. That's
Now, the
We have
Talmud
to
tells
cut
us.
out- We have to cut out the 300 sacrifice commandments.
what?
Why? What do you mean cut? We're talking about the 10 Commandments. There's no sacrifices. So the Talmud tells us additionally in the book of Makros 24a that there's a difference between the first 2 commandments of the 10 and the last 8 of the 10. How so? That the first 2, if you actually look at them, if you read them critically, you'll see the first 2 are in first person,
Yeah, I am the Lord. Yeah. Okay.
right? And do not have any other gods, right, before me. So it's God speaking. And the Talmud actually confirms by saying the first 2 they heard from God, the rest of them they heard from Moses. And we mentioned this before, I think. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe gave us Torah. Torah is Gematria 611. There's only 611 mitzvahs we got from Moshe, where he is the intermediary between us and God. He's the prophet who's given us what God wants. The first 2 we hear from God himself. That's why the Talmud says that the experience of the first 2 was so dramatic, because the Jewish people, right, 50 days prior are slaves in Egypt. Suddenly they're having prophecy, and they're not at all ready for it. They're not vessels that are primed for prophecy. So they hear prophecy, and they die, and they get revived. And it's obviously not an experience that these people are ready to absorb. But there is obviously something different about the first 2 commandments that we see. That it's really 2:8 and 603, I would argue. The first 2 is part of the 10 Commandments, but it's entirely different than the last 8 of the 10 Commandments, which are still different than the rest of the mitzvahs. So we see, on one hand, 10 mitzvahs that are special, and on the other hand, we see that these 2 are singled out, the first 2, as being maybe even extra special, because these we get from God. And the question is why? What's so special about the first 2 that make it necessary that we have to hear it from God, why can't we just hear it all from Moshe, or hear it all from God, or hear all 613 from God, or hear none from God? Like, there's something obviously special about those two that demands our investigation. I think the last question I want to ask before we get started here is, we know that the day where this Ten Commandments experience happens is the holiday that we still celebrate today in Shavuos. It's 50 days after Pesach, the 6th day of Sivan, the holiday of Shavuos. And the moniker of the holiday is Zman Matan Torah, the day of the giving, the holiday of the giving of the Torah. And if I were to say, how many mitzvahs in the Torah? Said 13. Excellent. How many do we get in Mount Sinai? On Shavuos? 10. Let's do the math. That's less than 6. That's less than, what's that, 3%? 2%?
Yeah.
About a little more than 2%. If I gave you 2% of a document, would that be the day that you herald as you got it? Or you got the beginning? You got a taster. You got a little, like what they give in Costco, those little samples. You got a sampling. You didn't get the whole Torah. And you would argue and say that, well, maybe that's the beginning. Well, really, it wasn't the beginning. The first place the Jewish people stopped is a place called Marah. Remember the place they can't drink water from. In Marah, they actually got mitzvahs. The Torah even says it. Shomni so, right? They got mitzvahs in Marah. So it wasn't even the first mitzvahs they got. It wasn't even the beginning of the giving of the Torah. So why are these 10, this day, heralded as the day of when the Jewish people got the Torah? So I want to try to examine and ask some important questions. And we know that out of the 613 mitzvahs, we have 248 positive mitzvahs and 365 negative mitzvahs. Right? Negative mitzvah means thou shalt not do X, right? Don't do, refrain, withhold from transgressing. Now, we're told that man as in mankind, we have 248 distinct limbs. And they correspond to the 248 mitzvahs. That's already interesting. Like, okay, is this just random? We have 248 limbs, and there's a requisite amount of mitzvahs. The Talmud tells us that there's 365 negative mitzvahs, and that corresponds obviously to 365 days of the year. So that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense. I don't know. Is that just random? That there's every day is assigned a separate mitzvah?
A separate negative mitzvah.
It's a negative mitzvah? And every limb is assigned a separate positive mitzvah? So that's an interesting idea we have to examine. But I would say for sure we could tell, I would make the argument that when the Torah is linking mitzvahs to our life, to our physical body and our existence in this world, 365 is completion. What it's telling us is that through the mitzvahs, we're able to achieve perfection. Right? If you do all 248, well, then you're perfect. You're a complete man. What happens to someone, God forbid, right, who is handicapped or is born with some deformity? It's terrible, right? God forbid. It's such a disaster. And that's incompletion. And the argument goes that when someone does Torah in its entirety, then they become perfect and complete. When someone says, oh, well, I'll do this mitzvah, but not that mitzvah, it's akin to someone saying, yeah, I need my right hand to drive and to write and to text, but who needs my left hand, right?
Unless you're me, of course, and then you have to.
Because you're a lefty.
Because I'm a lefty.
When you define limbs, how are you using the term?
Yeah,
limb?
actual physical limbs. So fingers, wrists.
248.
Yes. Now, by the way, there's a book, an ancient Jewish book, that says, let's delineate 248 positive mitzvahs. The first one to do that, by the way, is Maimonides, a man of firsts. He says, I'll tell you, because the Torah tells us that the 613 doesn't actually delineate which one's a mitzvah, which one's not a mitzvah. If you count on all the instructions of the Torah, you'll have a lot more than 613, because some of them are part of categories. So if you have one mitzvah that has multiple categories, It's not necessarily a distinct mitzvah. It's just part of one bigger mitzvah. So Maimonides does the work for us of saying, okay, there's 248 mitzvahs. Let's list them 1 to 248. And he does. He actually does it in conceptual order as well. But there's another book that says, you know what? Let's count the 248 limbs. And we'll tell you not only which one of the 248 limbs, which ones correspond to which mitzvah. For instance. Okay, for instance.
No, the series no. Like, what would be a lower mitzvah, like number 200, for instance, and what would 200 out of the body?
Well, we're not going to accord value to mitzvahs, but let me share with you an idea. Well, let's hold off on this for about 4 minutes. So I would argue, I think, from this that we see that the mitzvahs in their entirety are meant to bring us to become perfect. And we find sources that talk about what happens to someone's spiritual self when they abstain from certain mitzvahs. Well, then they look, on a spiritual sense, they look like someone who has a physical deformality. I mean, just like when you see someone, God forbid, who's a quadriplegic, or someone who is in a wheelchair, or someone who is a wounded veteran or something like that, and it's really striking, it's really terrifying, it's really sad, it's really tragic. Well, that's what someone looks like spiritually when they say there's certain mitzvahs that are not for me, because in their spiritual body, right, in their spiritual makeup, they have a parallel to the physical, and just like in the physical we have 2 hands, we have 2 spiritual hands as well. Well, there's a mitzvah that corresponds to your spiritual right hand. And if you say, this is not for me, okay, then you are deformed spiritually. And that's obviously terrifying. Yet, so we see that the mitzvahs come as a package. It's not just individual mitzvahs that have their individual value. They're all linked together, just like one body is linked together. Yet we see that there's certain mitzvahs that are put on a pedestal. 10 mitzvahs are different. 10 mitzvahs are different, and not only that, there's 2 mitzvahs that the Almighty gives us Himself that are even more special. What's the deal? Are mitzvahs a package? Are we trying to achieve the totality of the mitzvahs, or are we trying to just, or is there something special about these 2 or these 10? So Sandy hit the nail on the head, as she frequently does, and she said that actually, if you look at the 10 Commandments, you'll see that included in the 10 Commandments are the entire 613 mitzvahs. We have a book. It's more likely, I would call it more of a really long poem by Rabbi Saad Yargon. Rabbi Saad Yargon is one of the Gaonim. What is a Gaon? A Gaon is the name given to the great Jewish leaders from about the time of the, I would say, from the 7th century of the Common Era to the 10th century of the Common Era, which is a little bit of a dark period in general in world history. And we don't. And even in Jewish times, we don't have the same degree of scholarship as we had previously in the Talmud, the Mishnaic era, or even after that in the Rishonim era. But that's the time. So Rabbi Saad is one of the very important figures of that time period in human history, in Jewish history. And he says, you know what? Let's take the 10 mitzvahs. Takes the 10 mitzvahs and tells you which of the other 613 fit into each category. Right? Which ones go into mitzvah 1, 2 to 10. Right? If you take all 613, they all fit into, these are 10 categories that incorporate all of the mitzvahs, which is a fascinating idea. The Midrash goes a step further. If you actually count the letters of the 10 Commandments, from the beginning of I am the Lord your God till the end of Thou shalt not covet, 613 letters. Corresponding to the 613 mitzvahs that are incorporated within that.
But the 10 Amendments were not originally written in Hebrew, were they?
The 10 Commandments?
Yeah.
Of course.
They were.
Yeah.
Aramaic or Hebrew?
Hebrew.
And so Hebrew, old, ancient Hebrew, modern Hebrew, still 613?
Yeah.
Didn't change.
Yeah, what was, remember, the Hebrew, even when the Hebrew changed, it just changed the style of writing. But the actual letters and how it's spelled, no, the spell is spelled the same. just like if you would use an uppercase or a lowercase English, right?
In the,
Or script.
13, is it in English or in Hebrew?
Oh, it's in Hebrew, of course, because in English there's much more words. Now, in the translation, if you actually take a King James or an Art Scroll edition of the Ten Commandments, you count to be a lot more than 613, because Hebrew is a very conservative with letters. Because remember, Hebrew words are pretty much only consonants.
Yeah, we Jews don't speak much, right?
Yeah, well,
They make up for it.
there's no vowels, so the words are much shorter.
The vowels were added later.
No, the vowels are there. Well, sometimes the Torah does incorporate vowels. So in Hebrew, the vowels can either be there or not be. That's what the idea of chasirot and yitzerot of the Torah, which sometimes words are spelled with vowels in the form of letters, like the aleph, the hey, the ayin, and sometimes those are included in nikudot that are not in the Torah scroll. Like we all know the nikudot and these dots and the slashes and the right
But
plus
they
signs.
were there originally?
No, well, that's part of how to read the Torah, right? But sometimes the Torah actually does.
Like the aleph and the ayin and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it means like the word. I just saw this in the Talmud recently. The word na'ara, which means a young girl. How do you spell it? Well, nun ayin resh hey, but in the Torah it's spelled frequently nun ayin resh, because the hey is a vowel, which is in the form of the nikudot, but sometimes it's spelled with a hey. And the Talmud even goes and says the reason why it's spelled with a hey in a certain instance is to tell you a separate law. So that extra vowel that does nothing really to contribute to the pronunciation of the word is actually teaching you an entire law that we derive, because it's not necessary to be written. Either way, this is a fascinating idea. Like, there's 613 letters in the Ten Commandments, and they correspond to all the mitzvahs. So perhaps we could say that when the Jewish people got the Torah at Mount Sinai, they actually did get the Torah at Mount Sinai. They got a very condensed version of it. They got a highly concentrated version of the Torah. But they got it all, because all 613 mitzvahs are included in this top 10 list.
How many people at that time were able to decipher that?
Well, maybe they didn't even know that. They didn't know that. And they were, and then Moshe spent the next 40 years unpacking the Ten Commandments for them and showing them the manifestations of these 10 godly principles. How does it translate into our life, which is much more complex? And I'll tell you even more. We find that all the Torah is included in the first two. The first two commandments of the 10 commandments, which we heard from God, those two incorporate all 613 mitzvahs. How so?
Tell me the first two again.
Faith, believe in God, no idolatry.
You shall not
Have
make
any other
unto me
gods.
any graven
That's right.
image.
That's right. That's right. You don't have any gods, no graven images, etc. How so? Every mitzvah, anything that you do because God tells you, that's an affirmation of faith. And any time you reject God, you say, God says this, I'm not listening, I'll still do it. Well, that has a taint of idolatry as well. If you really believed in God, would you do it? No. So obviously you're opening up the door for God not being the primal power or the only power in the world. So essentially, the Jewish people got the entire Torah from God himself. And that's why it was so important, so crucial, to take these two, the first two mitzvahs of the 10, and separate them from everything else. And these, the Jewish people, have to hear from God. Because at the core of all of Torah is these two mitzvahs. And the Almighty wanted the Jewish people to hear it straight from God. No interlocutor. Right? Moshe is not involved.
So by doing all the commandments, then you are putting God first. You're showing that you're first.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. Every mitzvah is rooted in faith. And every transgression is rooted in idolatry. Let's take this a step further to what Leslie brought up here. If all mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, correspond to a limb, which one would you think that the mitzvah of faith, the first mitzvah of the Ten Commandments, corresponds to? Which limb would you argue? Booyah, the heart. And it's absolutely clear in the sources that talk about it. It's clear that the heart, because the heart is at the core of the big picture of the body. Right? Everything depends upon it. It's the lifeblood of every other organ. Faith is the lifeblood of every positive mitzvah. And which day would you say corresponds to the prohibition against idolatry? Well, Shabbat is not a day of the year. Which day out of 365?
February 29th.
Well, I'm gonna guess Yom Kippur.
Booyah. If you remember, we spoke about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day where, I'm sorry, we're closest to God because we become like angels, exactly. Because this is the day where we don't have any other gods. There's only one power. Thus, this is the day where we have the mitzvah of having the one God and thus no others. And every mitzvah, every negative mitzvah, stems from that. Just like Yom Kippur. That's the day that's most influential for the whole year. That's the day of the year. Right? This mitzvah is the day of. Is the mitzvah of all of them. So I mean, this I think presents the Ten Commandments in a different light. Like now, it's not just 10 mitzvahs that were chosen at random to be given on a mountain. This is everything really in a very highly condensed format. The 2 and the 10, which is interesting, and thus
the first commandment corresponds to the heart.
Yes.
And what about the second?
Second commandment corresponds because that second commandment is a negative commandment. Don't have any other gods. Don't make any graven molten images. Right? That corresponds to the day, which is Yom Kippur. Thus, we could say this is the holiday of getting the Torah. When we celebrate the holiday of receiving the Torah, right? It's because we indeed got the whole Torah. Yes, it took us 40 years to actually to flesh it out and to make sense of it for our lives. Bless you.
So what's significant about the number 40? That it would take 40 years? If not,
Well,
it's an accident, but what's
well, remember
significant?
that it didn't have to take 40 years necessarily.
40 is a number that repeats itself.
True, but it also 40 is the amount of days. What the Torah tells us is that the spies, Moshe sent spies into Israel. They go for 40 days touring the land. They come back and they start speaking negatively about the land. And people say, "Oh, let's go back to Egypt. It was such a bad idea. We're going to lose the fight." And they don't realize that the Almighty is with them. Those 40 days in the punishment the Jewish people got for those 40 days was the 40 years of wandering. So
represents change.
yes, that's true. So we do find a lot. I'm not to disagree with that.
Wasn't it also to get the generations that it's sinned to be consumed, basically?
Oh yeah. So it's essentially it's turning over a new leaf.
Right.
So it's a different nation that leaves Egypt than the one that goes into the land of Israel. So I found here another very powerful idea here. This is one of my grandfather's writings. He says over here that we live a life and we have a society, we have the government, and we have the police power, we have the army, we have elections. Lord knows we have elections. We have culture. We live in a world with a lot of stuff going on, right? And then we have science and law, and then we have religion. And what happens, like in our world, right? So we have religion. Religion is very important. So Sunday we go to the class, or in America, Sunday you go to church, and then you go to the concert, and then you go watch the game, and then you go to your job. And that's the world we live in. You read the paper, you're interested in sports, whatever it is. That's the life that we live in. And one of those categories is religion. What happens to someone who goes to Mount Sinai and experiences prophecy with millions of other people and has the most transformative experience in all of human history? What happens to that person? What happens right away? What happens to the sports? What happens to the politics? What happens to all the nonsense in our lives? It all disappears. It all loses its value. The second that you have absolute clarity, you have this tangible vision, this experience, and once again, I encourage everyone to read what happened there. Just read the descriptions, both in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. You hear God speaking. Think about that. Everything else becomes moot. That's just God saying, Anochi, one word, I am the Lord your God. Boom. Everything else in your life loses its importance. Religion is no longer just one element of your life. It becomes the only thing. Which obviously for us, I think is probably a little scary. We don't want it. We don't want it to be too invasive into our life. But imagine we were by Mount Sinai. And we hear this, and we experience this, and we freak out, and this is not meant for us, and it's so overwhelming.
It's like a lie.
Oh yeah, it's not just a nice thing, it's morality, it's family. It's not that, it's everything suddenly. And like religion changes from ceremonial, from being very important to being central in our lives. Which I think, as well, when we talk about the Ten Commandments, like, think about what happens to the people there. Think about how their life gets shaken up. Think about what a transformative experience this is. It's not just about, let's get some laws. Oh, let's find a convenient way to amplify the laws to millions. You don't have to just, you don't have to just have a lecture where you could fit 1,000 people in a room and you got to do that, 500 times or 5,000 times. It's not just a convenient way to inform people about everything. It's a way to change a nation of slaves into the Jewish people and then change the world.
But the same people who saw this miraculous thing are also the same people that became part of the spies.
And the golden calf, 40 days later.
And so I'm trying to hear what you're saying, but also understand that, so what already? Because you see this, yes, it is transformative, but we all go back to our highest level of learning. We got to fall back on something, and even though as huge as it was, we still revert back to what is our new normal.
That's right. So if you remember, we spoke about this a few times, about the golden calf, and B, the golden calf juxtaposed to Bilam. Because that's a very good question. Like, you have this experience, and 40 days later, you're worshiping a golden calf. So first thing we got to do, we have to understand that they weren't really worshiping the golden calf. It wasn't everyone. It was just a mixed multitude. It was just 3,000, very small percentage of the people. But still, it clearly demonstrates that this is not a normal way of learning. This is not the organic growth.
It was a sensory.
Oh yeah. And this is not organic growth that actually has lasting impact. I think, or at least not lasting impact on a behavioral level. Maybe on a philosophical or faith intellectual based level, yes, because it's undeniable what you saw, but your behavior is not going to change because of inspiration. It's actually work, and it's slow growth, at least for the most part. Another idea here, we find in the run-up to the Ten Commandments, the Almighty tells Moshe what's going to happen. And he tells him this verse as follows. Hashem said to Moses, "Behold, I am coming to you in a dense cloud, in order that the nation hears when I speak to you, and also in you they will forever believe." The Ten Commandments, the experience of Mount Sinai, was the testing grounds for Moshe's capabilities as a prophet. Why did the Jewish people believe in Moshe? Well, Moshe split the sea, and Moshe did the miracles in Egypt, and Moshe gave us water out of the rock, and Moshe turned the bitter waters into sweet waters. And is that why the Jewish people believe in Moshe? No. Maimonides goes at great lengths to disprove that by saying that all those miracles were all necessary. Those were all necessary, not as necessary to prove Moshe's truthfulness as a prophecy, but rather because, well, you need to split the sea, or else the Egyptians are attacking, or you need the water because everyone else was going to die. What actually, the reason why the Jewish people, and I'll read you a direct quote here from Maimonides, where he has his 4 chapters on prophecy in the end of the very first section of Mishnah Torah, as follows, quote, why? So first he says, the Jews didn't believe him because of the miracles that he did. Why? Because even someone who believes in miracles, you see something miraculous happening, you're still in your heart, you're not so sure, maybe there's some sort of trick, some sleight of hand. Rather, all the miracles that Moshe did was all for the actual need, not to be proof on his prophecy. He had to suppress the Egyptians. He had to split the sea. He's got to bring down the manna because otherwise people will die. They were thirsty. He's got to get the water from the rock, etc., etc. Why did they believe him? Because of the experience at Mount Sinai that their eyes, or our eyes, saw. No one convinced us. Our ears heard, and no one else told us about that. The fire, the sounds, the crazy events that they saw. Moshe goes up into the cloud, and we hear God talking to him. And then we essentially become bystanders to Moshe's prophecy. The Jewish people believe in Moshe's prophecy because they experienced prophecy alongside him. That removes all doubt. Thus, I would say that the 10 Commandments are not necessarily about the mitzvahs themselves, but about the experience, in that the experience made us have the faith in Moshe, that when Moshe gives us the entire Torah, or most of the Torah, we know that this is coming from a verified prophet. Right? And thus our belief in Moshe, that he's actually telling us what the Almighty tells him. And we're not believing, there's not the religion of Moshe. And the Torah that he delivers us is the word of God, not the word of Moshe. Well, how do we know? We only trust Moshe. Right? How do we know that he doesn't have editorial authority in the Torah? Well, he's saying this is the word of God. And I'm just the scribe, I'm the typist, I'm the stenographer. Well, how do we know? Because we know that Moshe is a verified prophet. Moshe is called the father of all prophets. Why is Moshe called the father of all prophets? Abraham was a prophet who preceded him. Abraham is Moshe's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Why is Moshe the father of all prophets? Well, the answer is because we only believe that Abraham is a prophet because Moshe told us. Moshe is a verified prophet. Why? Because a nation of millions experienced it. If Abraham came to us and said, I had prophecy, what would we say to him? We don't know if you're telling the truth or not. Well, it turns out he was telling the truth if he was to say that. But we would have no idea verifying it. Jacob has the prophecies, sees the ladder. How do we know that's true? If Jacob came to tell us, then we probably would believe him because he's Jacob. But we wouldn't know. We'd still have our doubts, I think. I think that's reasonable to be skeptic of someone's claimed prophecy.
But wasn't Noah a prior prophet?
Noah as well. How do we know Noah's a prophet?
Because it did rain for 40 years, so the proof was in what he said happened.
Yes, but is that proof enough to convince the skeptics? I don't know. Remember, Noah, that's many, many, many years prior.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of years prior. Why do we believe that Noah is a prophet? Because Moshe told us. Because Moshe told us. Because Moshe told us that Noah was a prophet. And by the way, even prophets that come subsequently, why do we believe that Joshua was a prophet? Why do we believe that Samuel was a prophet? Because Moshe lays out the groundwork for vetting prophets, for testing them. What are the requirements to be a prophet? Moshe lays it out.
Prophecy has to come true, right?
Oh, yeah. So there's a whole vetting process, how we actually check on prophecy. How do you become a prophet? How do you demonstrate your prophecy? How do we, check to make sure you're not a false prophet? What happens to a false prophet? That's obviously very, very disastrous. How do we know that? Why do we believe that Samuel was a prophet? Because Moshe lays out the groundwork. Moshe is the verified prophet. We all experience this prophecy together with him. And Moshe tells us that when someone does X, Y, and Z, they're a prophet. And when you test them with X, Y, and Z multiple times, and every time the prophecy comes true, they're a real prophet. And thus we believe in Samuel, in Malachi, in all the prophets because of Moses. Because Moses' prophecy is at a much higher level. And his verification was on a national scale. Pretty remarkable. Some other ideas here. We haven't even talked about the Ten Commandments, right? We'll still get there. We find in the Mishnah that the world is created in 10 utterances. You actually look in Genesis, 10 times says God says this, God says this, God says 10 times. Okay, so if 10 utterances to create the world, we have 10 commandments. Is there any relationships? So actually, this past Friday night, I was thinking about this because we know that this past Parsha, we just started a new cycle of Genesis. Simchas Torah, a couple was last week, and thus this past Shabbos was the Parshas Bereishis, beginning of Genesis. And the first thing we see is God created the world, 31 verses, very, very obviously intriguing, and very hard to understand, of course. That's not really an exhaustive description of Genesis. 10 times it says God created. And the Talmud goes on, the Mishnah actually in the book of Chapters of the Fathers says that there's 10 utterances that God used to create the world. Perhaps these two are linked. Perhaps we have at Mount Sinai, another realm of recreation of the world. Perhaps the world before Sinai and the world after Sinai is something dramatically different, that it rivals creation itself.
Isn't Jewish philosophy based off that God created man to complete the world, so that his 10 utterances were what he did to create it, and the 10 commandments are our ways of completing it?
So as if this is how we partner with God to create the world.
Right.
That's 1,000% what I agree with. But I didn't even think of it in that. And then we find also as well. We also find as well that I found so many more examples of the number 10 reflecting this idea of holiness and perfection. We need 10 people for a minyan. The Talmud says that Shechina only rests on 10. Abraham had 10 trials. Remember, Abraham is the most transformative character because he's the one who introduces monotheism. If you guys remember, when we talked about macro Jewish history, we talked about the idea of 6,000 years. Y'all remember that? 6,000 years, the Talmud says 6,000 years is the world. The world is 6,000 years. 6,000 year experiment. 2,000 years of tohu, of chaos. 2,000 years of Torah. 2,000 years of Mashiach. And we described this is like what Dan said. This is what is the overview of world history. It starts off with chaos. People don't know of God. God creates everything. Everything's there for us to uncover God, but it's all hidden. It's chaotic. And then we have Abraham emerging to change the chaos. And we see Abraham's 10 trials. Right? Or God creates the world with 10. Abraham's 10 trials. And then the next step is Torah, 10 commandments. And the idea, and this is another thing that I found, that holiness is associated with 10. We find the Talmud says, also another intriguing statement, this world is created with the letter Hey. The letter looks like this. And then the next world, Olam Haba, the spiritual world, is created with the letter Yud. What is the gematria of Yud? That's 10. Holiness is associated with number 10. I even found the Maharal saying something, this is not my style, but I thought it was cool, that the number 10 is perfection. Why? Because everything, you say 7, you can still move to 8. 8, you still move to 9. 9, you move to 10. 10, the only way is you start back from 1. Interesting.
We are in the 10th month of our calendar.
Okay, well, but I'm saying, I think there's a danger of saying, well, I had 10 donuts. That's really holy. Oh, holy, nice. 10 bagels. There's the risk, obviously, of taking this too far, but we find the 10 plagues, and is it all coincident? Probably not, especially because the Talmud links them all together. I think it's an interesting idea. We talk about maybe that this marks a turning point in all of human history, all of world history, really. That there's creation of the world, Abraham's 10 trials, the 10 plagues in Egypt, and the 10 commandments of giving the Torah.
Perfect 10.
Go ahead. What did you say?
Perfect 10.
Yeah. So,
Let us mean any number of things. I'm not thinking just one thing. Okay.
Let us quickly go through the 10 Commandments, because I think obviously in the 10 Commandments themselves, there's a lot to talk about, and obviously in this format, it's hard to really cover everything. But we'll try to do some of the important things. Well, they're all important, but we're going to try to cover some of the things that I like Vitaly pointed out are very, I think, problematic for us in the 10 Commandments. So let's quickly run through them, just what they say and what they mean. And obviously, this is going to be a shortened version. Read it's not so long, but read it in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. So the first one is, I'm the Lord your God, believe in God. Right? Intellectual mitzvah, to have faith. Not only that, I am the Lord God who took you out of the land of Egypt. So the God we're describing is not just a creator, but someone who's involved on an individual and certainly on a national level with people, with the Jewish people. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. So if you're sitting there, you're hearing this, you're saying, God took me out of the land of Egypt. Like, God's involved with my life. So when we say that we have to have faith, it means more than believing in power, in a deity, in a creator who may have been gone on to deal with other cosmic important things. Rather, it's someone who's involved with us in our lives. Which, by the way, the idea that Einstein can wrap his head around. The idea of a creator, of an intelligence behind all the cosmos is something that a lot of people can wrap their heads around. But someone who's interested in our life, who, so to speak, matters to God what we do, how humans are the center of this universe, that's something that's hard for a lot of people to wrap our heads around. Because we seem to be so unimportant. Yet, what the Torah is telling us by having faith, by the importance of having faith, is that it's not just about believing in a God, it's believing in a God who took us out of the land of Egypt. So we're gonna expand upon that point in a little bit. Next mitzvah. Don't have any other gods. Don't make any other idols. What does that mean? Do not have a little... I know my dad used to do business in India, and he would say that every office building has got a little figurine, and they bow down. It's like insane. Like, these people are good at business. What's bizarre about it? People are very good at business, but they have these really... Rituals, but they take it very seriously.
In Japan, every block, it used to be, but even now, its villages has its own Shinto deity for every block.
It's
a little shrine to the.
Well, you have the mezuzah every time you go into a room. You have to remember God and all that stuff.
Remember, we're not according power to something physical, right? We're using it as a reminder. We use physical reminders about God. But the idea of something that you can make in a factory to have some power is very bizarre to us. And I would say that when we would look at this mitzvah, don't have any other gods, we say, oh, I got that one covered, right? I don't got no other gods. That's what we would think. And then we find in the Talmud as follows. Abraham had a book called the Book of Avodah Zarah. Now, we have a Book of Avodah Zarah as well. You go to the Talmud, 63 books. One of them is called Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah means idolatry. It's a book about the laws of idolatry. The laws are very, obviously, the exhaustive laws on idolatry. And if you look at our book, you open up any Mishnah, any Talmud on the book of Avodah Zarah, the book that talks about idolatry, it has 5 chapters. Talmud says that Abraham's book of Avodah Zarah, in Abraham's edition of the Talmud, it had 400 chapters. Now, if you were to actually read through the 5 chapters of our book of Avodah Zarah, you would say this covers everything. What else is there? What else is there that's not covered? Why would Abram have to have such a bigger book? Doesn't make any sense. So I think this opens up the discussion for our maybe expanding our definitions of idolatry. How so? At the root of idolatry, what part of our mental capacities are going to be oriented around idolatry?
Lack of sense of self.
But it's my grandfather said as follows. He said, every human makes priorities. We have in our head a list of values, and we have a totem pole, so to speak, where there's the highest value and then there's things of less value. And the decisions we make are based upon this ladder of priorities in our lives. So you obviously go with a higher priority, right? You know, your children and your family and, you know, your job. Like these things are a higher priority than what's happening in Syria right now, right? You know, yeah, we care about it, but not enough, I guess, or not that much. And every human has the ability to make priorities in life. Now, some people, their priorities in life are video games. Or like the highest priority in life is video games.
What?
Video games. Or stamp collections. Or politics. Right? That's possible. That's the highest priority in life. And what does it mean to believe in God? It means that God is A, a priority, B, the highest priority. If anything has a higher priority in your list of priorities than God, well, what does that mean? That there's something that you hold of more importance than God.
That's adultery.
Well, anything that is on higher on the totem pole than God is by definition idolatry.
So skipping, say, a service in favor of playing Doom or whatever they play now is
Keeping what?
skipping the service at the temple. In
No, it's
favor
much
of
more
playing,
than that. It's much more than that.
It's
It's if your job is more important to you than God, that's idolatry, because that's a priority that's above God.
What's the motivation for all that?
What do you mean? The motivation for someone to?
To adjust your priorities?
Well, that's not. I don't think it's
Isn't it
necessarily.
yes or hurrah?
It's not necessarily conscience.
Isn't it desires within us?
I would say that most often this prioritization happens, and we don't even know it. We don't consciously make a list necessarily. Maybe we should do that. We don't necessarily consciously do it. I think we can consciously do it, and I think that's what this mitzvah is telling us. The mitzvah is telling us don't have anything on a higher priority than God, because that's idolatry. How could you have a higher priority than God? How could anything be more valuable than God? Well, if it is, that's idolatry, because that's according to something other than God, the highest status on the pole. Now, I would say it could be done consciously. I think it's most often done unconsciously or subconsciously, because people don't think about these things necessarily, even though they do it.
Wait a second. How do we make this, like your job being a higher priority than God? The job is part of life and everything like that. Why is that an idolatrous thing? What do you have to do for God that interferes with your job?
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to manifest itself in behavior. All it means is that when someone, in their mind or in their capacity to make prioritizations, has something on a higher level than God, that's idolatry. Now, I would say I think there's 3 steps here, and this will get even more intense. It'll make you even more uncomfortable, Bernie. It's going to happen like this. And this shows us how there's room for us to grow in this mitzvah that we said, I don't bow down. I don't genuflect to figurines, right? I'm good. That's what we think. But when we actually, expand the issue, like we do here traditionally in this class, we find that maybe there is room for us to improve. Yes.
I was just saying, you don't have to necessarily, separate. You can bring up or think of God even at work.
Yeah, so-
Examples even at work.
Oh yeah. So I'm going to show you exactly how this works.
Right, and so therefore there's not this.
Yeah, there doesn't necessarily need to be a conflict. I'll show what I mean here. So I think the first step is to make God a priority. If God is not a priority at all, then clearly, there's room for improvement. Now, once God is a priority, we have to consciously find a way to make God the top priority. And then the third step, which would make you even more comfortable, Bernie, that's what I was referencing earlier, we have to make God the only priority. Now, what I mean by that is, there's a difference between a relative priority and an absolute priority. If anything has its own value, irrespective of God, then there's some value and priority that you're giving to something that's not God. So at the highest levels, that's also idolatry as well. Why? Because how can anything have its own value? It can have relative value. So what it looks like, what Abraham looked like with his 400 chapters of the book of idolatry, what it looked like was God obviously is the top priority, but God's also the only priority. And every other priority is only how related is it to the top priority. Thus, you would say, listen, Torah study, that's the best thing to bring man close to God. Well, that's got to be next on the list. Well, what else? What comes after that? What item is next going to bring me closer to the top priority? And that's how you would make your whole list a priority. So yes, your job would be important, because if you don't have a job, you'll be destitute. If you're destitute, you won't be able to serve God. So that's a priority, but only vis-a-vis the ultimate priority. And you'd say, well, you have to have a little bit of downtime, because if you don't have any downtime, you go crazy. Okay, so the sports is also a priority, but it's only a priority because it brings us to God. So thus, it's possible to spend your whole life just working on not committing idolatry, which most of us, we walked in today, we're like, oh, we're good with that. We have problems with thou shalt not covet and much all the way later on. And then obviously,
with the exception of the Sabbath, right?
What do you mean?
You said it. Did you not say just a moment ago? It's possible to work your whole life and repeat what you just said. It's possible to work
I just said that when we talk about the second mitzvah of the Ten Commandments, idolatry,
and not commit idolatry. Okay, I thought you said
So-
it's possible to work your whole life and not commit idolatry.
no, in the goal of becoming like Abraham, so to speak, in this mitzvah, where you don't have any blatant idolatry, as in bowing down to statues, but you don't have any remnant of idolatry in your consciousness, in your being, in your mind, wherein there's no priority aside from God in your life.
Okay.
Which is obviously a tall task for us. And by the way, I would say, and this may sound surprising to you guys, it was surprising to me when I read it last night, when my grandfather writes in one of his many books that the Ten Commandments are in descending order. How so? The easiest one, the one that's closest for us, is thou shalt not covet. And we would have thought that the opposite's true. That the easy one, faith, and that's of course we can have faith. When we actually dig deep into these mitzvahs, we talk about the first mitzvah really incorporates all 248 mitzvahs. Everything that we do in our life is an act of faith. Every mitzvah is an act of faith. And everything that we have that's not a mitzvah, that's not God related, is an act of idolatry. Like that obviously is so distant from us. Of course, and we recognize that. It's distant from everyone here, and distant probably from everyone who's on this planet. Well, maybe not everyone, the righteous people are maybe different. But this is obviously, I don't think, something that we could really accomplish overnight, or maybe not even over a lifetime to get like Abraham did it. So we don't really expect to be as great as him. Maybe we ought to strive to do that. But this is obviously something that's very distant from us. And when we go through one by one, we'll see that these mitzvahs have a simplistic understanding, and those have a deeper understanding as well. So let's move on to mitzvah number 3. Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So obviously that covers any kind of flippancy that we might have with God. It's pointed out in Rashi, Talmud, that this also means to not make any pledges or any swearings in God's name. It's very, very severe when you invoke God into your day-to-day conversations.
Why we affirm in court?
Yes, that's kind of yes. That's
Pretty solemn in court. So
Yeah.
it's-
so that I'm not going to get into that right now exactly, but we take it very, very seriously, and that's why they do it. By the way, when someone would in Jewish jurisprudence, swearing was a big part of it. Like if someone has, let's say, the idea of one witness. So in order to invoke even a civil law, you would have to have two witnesses. So if I say, "Hey, Bernie, you owe me $100," I would have to have two witnesses that prove either that I gave you I lent you the money, or etc. You stole it from me. However, if I have one witness, that'll make you swear, because you argue that you don't have to. So what does it mean to swear? It means to pull out a Torah scroll. It means to declare in all that's holy that you didn't take it from me. And the Talmud even talks about people that were innocent that would say, "I'd rather pay the money than have to swear. I'd rather pay the money, and I'm innocent, but I want to pay the money because I don't want to have to swear." Remember the Shabbos to make it holy, or guard the Shabbos. We think of that as, a nice day, and it is. There is a simplistic understanding, but at the deepest understanding, Shabbos is the root of every day. We find in the Jewish sources that talk about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they only exist due to the spiritual power of the previous Shabbos, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they only exist due to the spiritual power of the forthcoming Shabbos. Thus, essentially, Shabbos is what gives life, vitality to the whole week, our whole life. Honor your parents. Obviously, we spoke about that. Thou shalt not murder. Talmud says that if someone embarrasses someone in public, that's murdering. Like, why? Because now the face gets whitened as a cadaver. Well, that's a realm of killing someone. Whoa! Anytime you offend someone, it's as if you killed them? Obviously, this is a much more subtle, nuanced, a different understanding that just don't. I don't think anyone here has ever entertained trying to kill someone. Maybe if you have, your protect your family. If someone breaks into your house, maybe. But this is not really relevant to us. But the idea of murdering someone's character, or murdering someone I'll tell you guys what happened to me recently. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I understand what's the word? Not analogy, but y'all know what I understand the point in the Talmud you just cited, that you're murdering when you're slandering someone's character. I mean, it probably relates to gossip and everything. When you're embarrassing someone, who's committing murder, but that's not. That's a figure of speech, is it not? Even in the Talmud,
it is. I would say it is a figure of speech, of course, but it's not just randomly chosen as a figure of speech. I'd like to give you an example. Let me tell you a practical law.
It's not subject to the death penalty.
Oh no, of course not. Of course not.
Okay.
But let me tell you, there's a story in the Talmud, and then it comes with a conclusion. The story is in the Torah. We know that with the story of Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, in Genesis. Quickly, the story is that so basically Judah has 3 sons, and the first son marries this girl named Tamar, and the son dies, and he says, "Okay, we'll marry the second son," and he dies as well. And Judah's like, "Oh, this woman is bad luck or bad news," and he says, "The third son, he's still young. Come back when he's ready." So she leaves. She goes back to her household, her family, and eventually she realizes that this ain't happening. So what she does is she desires to have children from Judah be part of the Jewish people. She gets dressed up like a prostitute. She convinces Judah to patronize her, and she becomes pregnant. And eventually, this causes such an uproar that how was she pregnant? And she must have sinned. And Judah's actually the leader, and he's the guy who says, "Oh, okay, we're going to execute her." And even though he's the guilty party, so to speak, and as she's being taken away, she tells him, oh, take a look at this signet ring and the staff, and just the guy who owns that's the person who's the father. And Judah sees it, and he's like, oh, good. And everything becomes clear to him. He's like, oh, this is me. And the Talmud has a question. It says, why does she not just say, oh, Judah, you're the dad? She's about to be killed, right? You got to save yourself from dying. What's Tamar thinking? Why is she saying, I'll take a look at this and let him kind of make the conclusion, or not? Maybe he could have just said, oh, yeah, I've never seen that one before. That staff. It's a nice looking staff. I'll take it. You know, he could have said that, right? Mm-hmm. So Tamar did something, and then Judah did something as well. And by the way, Judah is the family of the king, of the kingdom of the Jewish people. You know why? Because of this episode. Because Judah was able to admit his own mistakes. And a king, the most important quality that a king has to have is the ability to be moda ala emes, to admit when they're wrong. And to not have the pride to stand by their mistake that they made. Because when someone in leadership has that quality, then it can be devastating for everyone involved.
Judah made lots of mistakes in this story.
Maybe.
Not the least of which was his actions, but more than that was he did not offer up the third son.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
he
don't
was...
say, yeah, well, he didn't offer up the third son.
Well, was he
In the
obligated
story.
to? I mean,
Yes,
this is a
he
good question.
obligated to-
Either way,
he
we...
shamed her to begin with.
Either way, Judah still displayed a remarkable quality by being able to admit their mistakes. And
But
that
only
is...
after she brought them to where he physically had to see them. I mean, it took a lot to get him there.
But he didn't know she was Tamar when he went to.
That's true.
He didn't know.
He had no idea.
She was
She,
disguised. He
right,
didn't
that's
know
right.
that was-
But now, so that's Judah. But what about Tamar? Right? Why is she not just announcing to everyone, this Judah's the dad, Judah's the dad? That's what I would have done, right?
Embarrass the guy, yeah.
So the Talmud says, Noach la'adam she'apa atzma k'tiv shenei shva, what does that mean? It means it's preferable for a man, for a person, to plunge themselves into a fiery furnace and not embarrass their fellow publicly. Now, obviously, this is a highly sensitive approach. Well, what it's telling us at the deepest levels that the idea of murder extends beyond actually shooting someone dead in cold blood. And that means that there's still room for us here as well. 7, thou shalt not commit idolatry, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit perjury, right? Lie falsely, and thou shalt not covet. The last 4. Go ahead.
Well, Rabbi, I was just going to, not to belabor this, but, I've always been intrigued, curious, whatever, about, because in most translations of the Ten Commandments that you see in Gentile translations, they use the word kill. We all know that the original was Hebrew. There is a word for Hebrew. There is a word in Hebrew, is there not, for kill and for murder?
Yes.
And they are different, are they not?
Yes. The
Okay,
word
you
that's
didn't
used...
I don't know if
Lo
you
Sitzach.
just didn't have time or you didn't want to get into that, but
Well,
I did allude to that earlier today. Y'all know,
yes, that's true. So you're trying to bring out the point that maybe there may be instances where killing. So you're saying, let's say, capital punishment, is that an encroachment on
Well, I
this?
wasn't
mitzvah?
even referring. I mean, I was referring in as a more practical sense.
Well, it's a war you can kill.
Well, that's not capital punishment, though. But you're right. That's the point. I'm just trying to say, I mean, some of the same people who are, some of them might be Christians, some, whatever they say, thou shalt not kill, means that you're not supposed to kill. You can't defend yourself. You can't.
Yeah.
Now sometimes they'll say, well, there's a difference there. But
Well, so the problem is that they happen to be wrong. Because the Torah makes it very clear in other places that, let's say, defend yourself. Someone coming to kill you, kill them first.
that's
that
in
would
the
be a
Talmud
mitzvah.
or the Torah.
That's in the Torah, it's in the Talmud, it's everywhere. It's very clear.
Is the word that
Well, in the Ten Commandments, it's murder. It's clearly lo tzach. The word laharod. Thank you, Leslie, for affirming that. The word laharod means to kill. The word retzach or tirtzach is murder. So this means the kind of killing which is not sanctioned by the law. Like in a case of war, obviously, in a case where you have to defend yourself or your family or even your neighbor as well, you're allowed to kill what's called a pursuer. If you remember, just in Exodus, just the 2 chapters later, chapter 22, 21 and 22. I think it's 22 in Exodus. The first chapter, 22, verse 1. It talks about the thief that's tunneling in. Y'all remember that? He's tunneling in. It says he has no blood. There's no blood guilt. Which means you kill him, you're not guilty. So there you go.
Kill them if they tunnel in at night.
That's right. They're intruder.
If they come in through the day, you are not.
That's right. That's right. That's
Really?
that's the verse of the Torah.
Now, why is
Well,
that?
the day means that they're not coming with nefarious intentions. They're coming to steal, but they're not coming to kill you.
If they come in at night, even God himself is under the cover of darkness. So it's really a sin against God as well, because the thought process that God can't see you, obviously.
Yeah. So, well, it's not necessarily day and night. The Talmud makes it clear that it means that if it has to be either clear as day that he's not coming to kill you for you to be guilty for killing the intruder.
Okay,
So
maybe they're talking about it, but somebody can kill you during the day just as easy as they can.
That's
at
true.
night.
That's why
Or
that's
just
why
as
that's why
they have the same intent.
that's why the Talmud says that when it says day, it doesn't mean literally day. It means that it has to be clear as day that the person does not come with the intention to kill you.
Okay.
Like, for example, the example it gives is if your dad comes and breaks into your house, you know your dad's not coming to kill you. Right? It's clear as day. That's what it says. Most likely. In most cases, right. So therefore, if it's clear as day that the person is not coming to kill you, then you're not allowed to kill them. But to answer your question, we don't have to go more than 2 chapters away from the Ten Commandments to find a case where the Torah itself sanctions you taking someone else's life in certain circumstances. So to say that because of the Ten Commandments, you can never legally, by Torah standards, kill someone is a demonstration of someone not reading the whole book. Not even reading a few chapters later. So 22, chapter 22 in Exodus, verse 1, it's clear as day.
Okay.
Like I said, there will be other examples as well. And the Torah talks about war, like how to operate in war. The Torah is clearly understanding that war happens and people die in war.
Do they still have the prohibition in war now that you cannot attack an enemy on all 4 sides? That you can only attack them on 3 sides?
Let them. Well, the Torah's perspective is always, well, not always, but in most cases, it's very pragmatic in war. It's always about offering peace terms first. It's always about trying to minimalize. And even today, like we see in Israel, it's interestingly that Israel is the country more than any other that is concerned about collateral damage. The way we operate war is also with the idea of God and morality at the forefront. Even in the ghastly tragedy of war, we cannot. The Talmud even talks about how we can't just destroy trees. Like the Torah is like environmentally friendly, even in war, which is bizarre. It talks about how if you need to go potty, right, in the war, you got to make sure you dig yourself a nice, a nice hole in the ground, and you got to cover it. In war times, that's what it says. You can't lose your humanity even in war.
Yeah, and this is so ironic because world propaganda tries to create the opposite impression of Israel.
Like this morning. Like this morning.
I don't know what happened this morning.
Well, they dropped a bomb and killed a pregnant lady.
Oh, Israel did this?
Yeah.
Okay.
In answer to their rocket attack, and happened to kill a woman that was pregnant, for heaven's sakes.
I didn't know that.
You think
so
that,
I'm sure they'll run that for all they can.
You think that Israel, the Israelis are against collateral damage because of world sanctions?
I do think that it's probably both.
Yeah.
I do think that they're under scrutiny more than the Syrians, right? How many people died in the Syrian civil war? 300,000? It's insane. It's insane. Like, and the world doesn't care, But then, I bet you this pregnant woman was probably near a launching site of rockets, and they brought her there on purpose.
Yeah,
So that should be a human shield, and and they put all the bombs, all the armaments in like school buildings and fill them with. It's insane. It's ridiculous. So I do think it's true as well. But I also think that the idea of Jews aren't cruel. We're not. And the Talmud even says that if someone displays cruelty, then they're not Jewish, because Jews aren't cruel. So, we never relish in the downfall of our enemy. Yeah, we might be happy because of we don't want to just hurt innocence.
It's kind of what
I think it's probably both.
Golda Meir said to Sadat, "I will never. I can forgive you for killing our people. I can never forgive you for allowing us to kill yours."
Netanyahu just said a few weeks ago, if Iran won't put down their weapons, there'll be no more war. If we put down our weapons, we would be annihilated.
Let me know where Israel, yeah.
You mentioned about the Ten Commandments are in descending order.
Yeah. Well,
It conflicts with something you said in the previous class. The 10th commandment is the highest elevation of showing your faith in God, not coveting. It seems like conflict with.
well. So but I also said that I read this last night, which was surprising to me. So yes, we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. How the 10th commandment, what that actually means, and how we can fulfill it.
The covet thing.
Yeah, but to me it was very surprising when I read that it's in descending order, because I would have thought that maybe the 10th commandment is the hardest one to fulfill.
How does one get caught?
Well, it's not about getting caught. It's and you know what? The two there are two mitzvahs of the 10th commandment that are in someone's mind, right? The first and the last.
Well, that's what I was going to add. How do you even define the word covet? I mean, isn't there many definitions?
Desire, lust,
Okay, that's
want.
what I would have thought. So,
And we're not playing around with the definitions of the word. Crave,
Desire is
desire.
different than lust.
Okay, but
To want.
to want what someone else has, their house, their spouse, their all the examples that it
want
gives.
in the sinister, but I mean, if I want to have, okay, let's leave the spouse out. But if I want to have a nicer house, for example, and if a friend of mine has a nice house, I want to have a nice house. Is there anything wrong with that? If I want to earn it, if I want to take it from my friend, there's something wrong.
Right,
with
so-
that.
Don't believe the
Huh?
other person
It's really
deserves
wants
it.
to take it.
But
It's not wanting, it's believing that the other person doesn't deserve, that you deserve it more.
well, that's a
than
new
that.
spin on what, and I don't mean spin in a derogatory way. That's a new explanation of, because I didn't know how many people, unless you're just downright evil, how many people want to take or want to say that they didn't deserve it. I mean, there's people out there, I'm sure, that say they,
Socialists.
okay, all right, well, and they're atheists anyway, so
Yeah, but the question is,
Sanders group,
how.
How does the rabbis define covet?
Yes, I want to talk about this
Yeah,
a
I
little
think
bit,
there's
but
a little more to it than that. Than
but
what
desiring that I cannot have.
Desiring that which I can.
Wait a minute.
So the question is like this:
in
is there,
America, we can have anything we want.
well,
that's
you can't have your
just-
neighbor's wife, right?
Well, I
Or
said
his
leave
house.
out the wife part.
Or his house.
Well,
Or his house, or his car.
Bathsheba technically was not married, because you were the one that said that Uriah, before the troops went to war, they essentially divorced their wife. So technically, Bathsheba was not married.
That's right. Don't blame me. I didn't say it. I just told you what happened.
Yeah, but I mean, I
No, but
Man is
look,
fine, yeah.
my
Anything
question
for
is,
David,
coveting
that's
thy neighbor's wife goes to pretty basic. You can control intellectually almost everything else. Idolatry, faith, but this is your basic. It's like hardwired into us, right? So it's
That is the
impossible
question
not
that I
to-
want to ask.
You can control it and control it successfully.
It's
but-
exactly the question I want
Is
to
there a
ask.
difference between admire
Thank you.
and covet?
For sure,
well,
for
that's
sure.
my whole point. How do you define it?
And I think Steve's point is correct that it's sometimes very beneficial for you to kind of up your game in life, whatever part of life we're talking about, where you see someone else do something, and that spurs you to become greater yourself, because of maybe this base desire to want that as well. But is there something wrong with, let's say, seeing the sales of your coworker and saying, "Oh, I'm going to push myself a little further. I don't want to end up with the steak knives."
I would hope not there's nothing wrong with that.
So is that under the category of thou shalt not murder? But I think the question is, that Vitaly pointed out. I think that's probably the core problem with this is that, okay, you want something. How do I make myself not want something? How do I change something which is, like you said, is hardwired?
Well, I kind of think of covenant, that when you covet something as almost, in this sense, like jealousy. I mean, it becomes burning.
Right.
It's not just, I want something like that. It's a lot of emotions and hate can become involved. And, that's kind of how I see it. It's not just you want something, it's deeper.
It seems like it's just reasonable to say or interpret it. It means don't feel you can take it because somebody else has it.
So that's the thing. It doesn't say don't take other people's stuff. It says don't covet them. If someone does not act upon this,
The action, here's the.
if they don't act upon it, it seems like they're still in conflict with this mitzvah. That's why it's so hard to understand. Like, the Torah tell us, the Torah perhaps, I think, is very fearful to tell us, hey, you want your neighbor's stuff? Don't try to come up with schemes to try to get it. That seems more reasonable. For us, this is taking us a step further. Don't even desire it. What do we go about to do? What if I do desire it? And how do we not? You see something really nice, a nice car, a nice house, right? You desire it. And that seems natural. How is the Torah realistically telling us to not desire what someone else has?
Because we are diminishing our lot. When you look at what somebody else has in comparison to
No,
what
this
you
is
have.
why you shouldn't desire, but not how you shouldn't desire.
Well, maybe the how would help you with the why.
There's a gratitude implicit in what you have. And when you look at what somebody else has,
Yours
then
gets
your
diminished.
cup, then you
You see
perceive
that
your cup
Ferrari
as
and
being
you
less full.
dopamine is washes over your brain, right? And you cannot control
That's the way
that,
I see
right?
it.
Well, is
That
it
would be
dopamine
the-
or
that's
is
what
it
they say
is
in
it
Rwanda.
is it envy?
Is that what they say in Rwanda?
Because it's dopamine. It's just that guy's driving the Ferrari.
I
You're
like
driving
the
your
fries
clunky
of that
Camry.
person.
Well, and that you think about driving a Ferrari, it makes you feel good. It's dopamine,
That's a guy
serotonin.
thing.
Well, the blonde driving the Ferrari.
Sandy, you were saying.
If I could read from the Humash, the commentary on covet.
Well, I have a commentary here that I don't know if it's mentioned there. I want to just because it's fairly long, so
This
you
is short.
go ahead.
It says, how can the Torah forbid something as normal as jealousy and being desirous of someone else's possessions? Does this not fly in the face of human nature? It is quite expected that an ignorant, poverty-stricken peasant might covet his neighbor's daughter, but would never dawn on him to lust after the queen. She is so lofty and inaccessible that such a thought would never enter his mind. The point is that sensible, logical people long to acquire only things that are within their frame of reference, not things that are beyond the scope of their imagination. Similarly, if someone has complete faith in God, he would recognize that property that God wanted his neighbor to have is as inaccessible to him as the queen is to a poor peasant.
And that's from the Ibn Ezra. Is that right?
I like it.
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't
So that's
know
what I
if
have
like
quoted here.
that.
It's okay.
It's still, it means
there.
everybody is relegated to the status quo. You can't ever advance in life. The peasant is always going to be a peasant, can't ever be the king.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what it sounds like to me.
He's saying I can't advance myself at the expense of somebody else.
Well, that's what I just said, and that's not the
Yeah.
way
So
I
let's
interpret what
so this Ibn Ezra, which is one of the great commentaries on the Torah. This is a very famous one, so I knew when you said you're going to read it that this is what you were going to say. So he gives this example, and he says a little bit more. So I'll just add to what you read. He says, like if you know something is, and this I think will ameliorate your problem.
I hope so. I don't, no, this is, okay.
Like,
no.
like this. What he's saying is that there are some things that are so beyond the frame of reference or even your wildest imaginations that you don't even desire it. And he gives other examples. So he says, the peasant there's no conceivable or even inconceivable situation where the peasant ends up with the queen. Doesn't happen. And he gives another example here. He gives in the core I have it in front of me here in Hebrew, and he says it is as reasonable for the peasant to imagine that they'll end up with the queen or the princess as that they'll grow wings and start flying in the sky like a bird. Ain't that nice? I guess now we have those hovercrafts or whatever. Maybe we can do it. And this is written a long time ago. But either way, it's something like that would be really nice. Wouldn't it be really nice to be able to have wings and fly home and save on all that gas?
But it's also, isn't the point is that's impossible? That's right.
So it's
Okay.
impossible. So why don't we desire it? Because it's impossible. He gives another example here, which I think is maybe slightly different. He says, no matter how beautiful someone's mom is, they don't desire her. Why not?
Because
It's the mood.
Exactly. And he says something that is so ingrained in your mind that it's off limits, you don't desire it. That's one thing. Or if something that you cannot possibly obtain in any way, it's also off. It's also you don't desire it. Okay. So this is step number one. Right? So what it's telling us, I think, step number one is that our desire, our coveting, our lust, our wanting something, it's not blind. Like, Vitali's like, hey, this is what I want. It's ingrained. It's hardwired. What it's saying is that, okay, we see some things that are not hardwired. It would be lovely to fly around like a bird, but it's so beyond that it's not something we would desire.
But it's not hardwired.
So our desire is not hardwired. It is actually, because we feel that something may be obtainable, that's why we desire it. Let's move on to step number two. So too, I'm reading this direct quote from the Ibn Ezra. It's a very famous Ibn Ezra. That's why I knew it was going to be the one mentioned here. So too, a man should recognize that the beautiful woman or the lots of money or the fancy house or the fancy car, right, it's only a product of what the Almighty allows you to have. And therefore, if someone actually has the faith to such a degree where they realize that the Almighty apportions to everyone what they need or what they ought to have and nothing else, therefore someone else's house or car or wife or whatever or ox or whatever should be as unobtainable as flying around like a bird, or as the princess or the queen for the peasant. So what really it's saying here is that this mitzvah is a mitzvah that really is an extension of faith, or it's a manifestation of faith, wherein the faith gets so rooted, maybe even hardwired into our psyche, that not only do I think that things that are physically unobtainable are beyond what I desire, but things that are seemingly obtainable, when I realize that the Almighty gives me what I need, and what even beyond what I need, but that there's a certain allowance that the Almighty gives for me, and nothing else. Thus, what I can obtain, I will obtain. What my neighbor has obtained, I won't obtain. Right? His stuff are his stuff, my stuff are my stuff. That faith will remove the desire.
But to me, this is so un-American.
Absolutely.
It's unhuman.
Well, who's to say?
Inhuman.
But if I
But it's-
say, my neighbor has this great house, oh, I want his house. Now, that's a bad thing. But to say, I want a house like his, and I'm gonna go to school, and I'm gonna get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and I'm gonna become a doctor, and I'm gonna be able to afford it, and I'm gonna get this great big house.
And I'm going to
That's
heal
what makes
people
our
in the
country.
process of getting it.
Yes.
And I think
I'm going to create
and I think that's fine.
wealth.
I don't think that's necessarily.
We're gonna skip this down to
I don't think that that.
don't do anything.
But I think that may be okay. I don't think that's necessarily coveting. I think maybe you're getting inspired
Well, that's what I
by
try.
your neighbor. And as Janet told us, first of all, if it's un-American, it's not necessarily. Janet, you started off by saying that our system, our society is not necessarily so moral.
Yeah,
Remember
this
you
is,
mentioned that?
well, but this is pre-America. We all understand
course.
that. But yet
But
we
I-
also know the framers of our law, of our Declaration of Independence believed in a lot of this stuff.
True, but I think there's nothing wrong with saying, I want a beautiful wife, or a beautiful house, or a beautiful car.
Are we at a place where only Donald Trump can say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing"?
No, of course not.
Well, he said that whenever he's wrong, he'll admit it. He said that the other night on Jimmy Kimmel.
You know what happened? The Lord is my shepherd,
True.
I lack nothing.
True. But we're trying to change. We're trying to change something that, from our earliest life and earliest experiences, has been part. You see that the child sees that the other kid has a lollipop. I want that lollipop, right? My other days out with my kids, right? When their friend comes over, and there's this toy that's been neglected for months, and suddenly the neighbor or the friend starts playing with it. He's like, "Oh, I want that toy," right? It's ubiquitous, right? And why? It's not because they want the toy. It's because someone else has, and that arouses a certain desire for that toy.
Well,
That as we grow, we advance, that doesn't necessarily change. And the Torah is telling us that we have to change it. Well, how do we change it? So what he's telling us, I think it's an incredible idea. We have to really
Control yourself. You learn to control yourself.
But how? How does it work? It works because there are certain things that we won't desire. Because
And
they're beyond.
well,
How do we make things that are not ours, our neighbor's wife, our neighbor's house, our neighbor's car, our neighbor's everything? How do we move those things into the category of they're beyond our possibility?
I think what you said, or what it said, is by believing more in God, and that will make you content enough to where you don't need this other stuff. I think
Not only that, you don't need them. You realize that the Almighty gave it to them and not to you.
Yes.
And that will move into this category of being unobtainable, and thus you won't
I
desire.
thought we had free will.
True, we have free will. So,
And the
and you
Almighty didn't necessarily give us these things.
And
We
the-
either earned it or.
true, but you're right. But our free will is limited to what means our free will in let's say earning, right, is limited to what the Almighty allows. There's an allowance, of course. Our actions matter, and I would even argue that we could go and take the neighbor's wife and house, right? It's possible, right, by force.
It happens frequently.
Too frequent.
it
But-
happens every day.
You know, I'm building a new home. I had another home. I love the home I was in. I appreciated what I had. That didn't mean I had to stay there forever.
No one's saying you have to.
Yeah, exactly. I know you're not saying that.
And
It's not-
no, we're not. This is a mitzvah that's not talking about any behavior. It's talking about in your mind, in your heart. Do you pass someone else's house and have some sort of angst that that's someone else's house and not yours? That's the only thing. It's not about behavior. So you build your house as nice and beautiful as possible. Take inspiration from your neighbor, right? But the point is that this is a very subtle and point in someone's feelings that the Torah is telling us we cannot have. And that is, you see someone else's beautiful wife, right? Or really fancy car, right? You don't even for a second desire it at all. That's what the Torah wants us. And how do we do that? We find out that that's really an extension of faith, where the faith actually changed what we would have thought is hardwired.
It's interesting how you always mention coveting the neighbor's wife. Nobody talks about coveting the neighbor's husband. But it's 50-50, you know.
That would be, I think that would be included, obviously.
Yeah.
Everything, everything that you're that's the last words is very inclusive. Don't cover this, that, and everything that the neighbor has. You know, so it's not about behavior. It's not about acting in a way that's different.
Now the
It's about-
feminists would say that's part of the chauvinism of the Bible. Okay.
It was written by men, you know, or excuse me.
It was typed.
Taken down by men, yes.
But you know,
But one of the things I've read is that you should wake up every day knowing that you have the exact amount of material resources for that day that Hashem wants you to have. But then what you do with those resources throughout the day is to better yourself and the people around you is a fantastic thing.
yeah, and incidentally, like this doesn't mean that the Torah wants us to disavow materialism, because in fact the opposite's true. We find with Jacob endangers his life to to go pick up a few little cans, right? Jacob was a really wealthy person, and then he had left on the other. He was crossing the river, and on the other side of the river, he left a few like pots and cans and jars and jugs, and he goes back and he finds it, and then he has to struggle with the angel. But he essentially endangers his life to save, a little can. You say you're so wealthy, you're going back to. You see the super wealthy guy who left a quarter in the phone booth, and he's a mile away, and he turns around and makes the U-turn and goes back to collect the quarter. Doesn't seem right? You have enough, right? That's what you would imagine, and
Cost him more in fuel to go back.
maybe, and it tells us, and one of what tells us about Jacob, that Jacob, he did that, and we would think maybe it's a mistake, and then the Talmud tells us more. It says that tzaddikim, the righteous people, they value their money more than their body, which seems very bizarre, right? Money is not so important. So, maybe money is important if you realize that money came from God. Well, why is it more important than your body then? Body also came from God. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. Perhaps the answer is that, with your money you could do more mitzvahs than with your body. I don't know. That's a good question. But either way, to argue that the Torah is telling us that we don't value materialism, that's a mistake as well. We value it a lot because we realize it came from God, but in that same vein, because we realize it came from God, and what the neighbor did came from God to him as well, and not to me, I shouldn't desire that if I have real faith. So essentially, we could say that there's this stream that links the first and the last commandment. How do I know if I have true faith if I don't covet? How do I know if I fulfill the first of the 10 commandments if I fulfill the last? And I think someone can, pray and study and go to the synagogue and everything, and you would think from the outside that this person has complete faith, and then if he covets, we find that there's still room to grow. Just say another interesting related insight here. Then we'll let you guys go because it's been overtime as usual. I apologize for that. We find, so what this is telling us is, I think, that the Torah's ultimate, means if we're to zoom out now, okay, now we know what it means to not covet and how we get there. Well, what does that show? What does that demonstrate of the Torah's demands for us? What does that show? The Torah is not just trying to change our behavior. And not even our priorities. It's trying to totally change the things that we would even argue are uncontrollable aspects of our lives. Things that we don't even consciously do. Like, to change the way you think is maybe a hard thing to do, but to change what you desire, that seems much harder. The Torah is trying to penetrate us to such a degree that it changes us from the inside out. It changes not only the way we behave, not only the way we think, but even the way we desire, which is even on a deeper level in our consciousness. I found another example here. Like, what does it mean someone who's a Torah scholar? So we find various definitions throughout Jewish writings about who is considered a Torah scholar. I found one in the book of Sota, where it says that a Torah scholar is someone who studies Torah, okay, and that's their main focus in life, thinks about the Torah all the time, and doesn't walk 4 cubits without thinking about Torah. So, what does that mean? 4 cubits is about 8 feet. What this means is like this. Without conscious thought, without directed intellectual focus, someone's just basic thought, like what do your thoughts meander to when you're not thinking about anything, right? So that's just basic. What do you think? I don't know. Your mind, your fantasies, your imagination. You revert back to what happened that day or what your plans are tomorrow, right? But when you're not focusing on something, it's very hard for us to imagine someone to just revert to this default state of Torah study. What the Torah is telling us is that through Torah study, through conscious Torah study, it's possible to become to achieve unconscious Torah study, wherein your just default state of thinking, of mind, you don't work for cubits. That's not a controlled, focused, directed thought, energy, intellectual pursuit. That is just what you think about at random. It's possible for us to change ourselves even at that level of our existence. And all this is included in the Ten Commandments. Like the Ten Commandments is telling us that there are parts of our life that we would think is uncontrollable, so deep within ourselves. Such a basic aspect of our lives, and even that we're trying to change. So, in conclusion, I think that we talk about the Ten Commandments. What we clearly see is that there is a lot beyond what we would just typically accord it by a reading of it. Of course, the majority of the world is familiar with the idea of the Ten Commandments and what they talk about. What we see is that this is really something encompassing. It's all the Torah is included in the Ten Commandments. All the Torah is included in the first two. These are instructions that can really create us from beginning to end. We see how each commandment really is more than just one mitzvah. It really incorporates a lot of mitzvahs. But it's even the first two incorporates everything. And we talk about idolatry. Idolatry incorporates anything that has any value aside from God. Like, wow, how much room is there for us to take these Ten Commandments and use them as a method, as a tool to become really great people. And that's why it takes such a focal point in Jewish philosophy. In fact, there used to be a time where this was included in the daily prayers. Talmud says, interestingly, that it was taken out of the prayers because the heritage would say, these are the mitzvahs that we mentioned in the prayers. This is all we've got. All the other mitzvahs are not important. That's why they had to take it out of the prayers to prevent that cynical response. But clearly, the Almighty outlined for us at Mount Sinai a approach to become great people with these 10 principles, these 10 categories. And let's be inspired by the Ten Commandments. We're familiar with it. Let's first of all read the Ten Commandments and just learn about this experience and kind of think about the impact and the influence and the ramifications of this experience on its own, but also what it means for us today. How we could utilize this section of the Torah to really mobilize ourselves and become great people that the Torah envisions that we can become. Thanks you all for coming and listening. Apologize for going overboard, and I look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks. Next week I will